Okay, I think we are live. It would be good to get a confirmation. Okay, people can see us, it's good. If not YouTube, at least, yes. Okay, hi Kim, hi Jim. I think we are live. Okay, someone needs to not be playing the YouTube at the same time. Would be good to get a confirmation. Okay, people can see us, it's good. Is it me? If not YouTube, at least, yes. Okay, hi Kim, hi Jim. We are live. Sorry, that was me. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Elena Shkorsky. I have curated this event. Thank you everyone for coming. So we have some people on Zoom and also it's being streamed on YouTube. So if you are on Zoom, you will be able to engage with our Q&A function. But yeah, the YouTube will also be available after the event as a link. So if anyone misses this, then they can watch it. So I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to the context of this talk and to the people involved. The title of this talk is Haunting Newstead Abbey. And we have Seke Chimutengwende, Mary Pearson, Mayfield Brooks and Butler, who's going to be facilitating the talk once I've introduced everything. So this talk is sort of within a broader project which is called Dancing Museums, which has been running for a few years. It's actually the second Dancing Museums project. It's a European funded project and it involves I think around 7 European cities, and it includes artists such as myself. I'm associated with the project, dance organisations, museums and galleries, and also academic and research partners. And it's a research project which is looking into how choreographic practices can exist in museums and galleries. So I've invited these artists today. Mary and Mayfield have a project together which is called How to Be Afraid, which explores their ancestral connections with the transatlantic slavery and situates this in post-colonial Liverpool and New York. Through movement and dialogue, they explore power, trauma and agency, asking how we can face fear, heal from trauma and repair deep historical schisms. Seke is here. I've invited him to talk about a project that he has, which is as yet untitled, I think, which involves working with 5 dancers to make a group choreography using the haunted house as a metaphor for how the horrors of slavery and colonialism haunt the present. So part of my interest within dancing museums has been how to find ways to talk about racialised histories that are present in many museums. One of the museums that I'm working with in Nottingham, or maybe I should say, yeah, so the city that I'm representing is Nottingham. The partners involved in Nottingham are Dance for, Nottingham Contemporary and Nottingham City Galleries and Museums. And one of the museum sites is Newstead Abbey, which is the site that's kind of triggered these specific interests. So Newstead Abbey is a stately home that's situated just outside of Nottingham. It's a museum to Lord Byron, essentially, but it has a lot of history kind of either side of and around Lord Byron that is not sort of at the forefront of the sort of public narrative. So after Lord Byron lived in Newstead Abbey, it was bought by a man called Thomas Wildman in 1817. Thomas Wildman had a huge amount of wealth from owning a sugar plantation in Jamaica. He at one point was profiting from having 886 enslaved people on this plantation. So he had a huge amount of money which he used to rebuild the house and buy the house and rebuild the house. So the house that, if you go and visit Newstead Abbey today, the house as it stands is what Thomas Wildman built with his slave money. And then after that, the house was owned by someone called William Webb, a so-called explorer of Africa, who, along with many other white missionaries and people in the army, paved the way for the colonization of the continent of Africa by Europe. So this is a big part of the history of the house that I think could do with being told a bit more. And I thought that Dancing Museums was a great opportunity to bring together the research that these artists here are doing with this historical site. And these choreographic practices would be a way of exploring those histories. So, COVID allowing, Seke, Mary and Mayfield will be in residence at Newstead this summer, in residencies, doing their separate research projects. So this is a talk sort of in advance of that activity. So I'll just say a little bit more about the panellists and then I'll hand over. Mayfield Brooks improvises while black and is currently based in Brooklyn, New York, on Lenapehoking land, the homeland of the Lenape people. Mayfield is a movement-based performance artist, vocalist, urban farmer, writer and wanderer. They are currently an artist in residence at the Center for Performance Research and Abrams Art Center in New York City, Lenapehoking. They are faculty at Movement Research NYC and the editor-in-chief of the Movement Research Performance Journal. Mayfield teaches and performs practices that arise from their life, art, movement work, improvising while black, and was the recent recipient of the biannual 2021 Merce Cunningham Award in Dance granted by the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. Mary is a dancer, performance maker based in Liverpool. She toured solos Failure, The Sand Dog Cometh, and FOMO Mofos internationally between 2012 and 2018. Her multidisciplinary practice is rooted in improvisation and collaboration. As a somatic experiencing practitioner, she is researching how performance practices can address collectively embodied trauma. Current collaborations include How to Be Afraid with Mayfield and Kudera Impersonator, Anthroposcreen Byproducts, a hybrid fashion and dance-making dialogue with Elena Kudera highlighting consumerism, plastic waste, and fashion's role in the climate crisis. Seke is a choreographer, performer, movement director, and teacher based in London. Since 2006, he has trained extensively in improvisation, has performed over 60 solo improvisations internationally, and has performed ensemble improvisation with numerous dancers, actors, and musicians. Seke began making choreographies in 2011, including Black Holes, a collaboration with Alexandrina Hemsley, which was selected for the British Council's Edinburgh Showcase in 2019. Season is a writer, artist, dramaturg, and lecturer in performance studies and creative writing. Her writing, research, and art practice centre around intersectionality and narratives of otherness, isolation, and negotiations with hope. Her debut novel, Signet, was published in spring 2019 and won the Writers Guild 2020 award for Best First Novel. Season lives and works between London and Berlin. So this is our fantastic panel. Just to say that if you are listening via Zoom, Season is going to be able to field any questions that come through the Q&A function. So if you just click on the Q&A button and type in a question at any point during the talk, and then Season will hopefully be able to weave in a few of those questions along the way. And if you're watching on YouTube, sorry, you can't ask questions, but you will enjoy it anyway. So yes, thank you. And I'll hand over to you, Season.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm really pleased to be here with this panel and to be able to witness and support this conversation. I'd really quite like to know from each of you what sorts of questions you are bringing to this work at this point. I mean, I know that the residencies don't even begin until the summer, but as you've begun to kind of think about approaching these topics, and I know that all of the subject matter is very much alive in your thinking and in your work. So I wonder if we could hear from Mayfield and then Mary and then Seke, just to hear some of the questions that are arising at the moment for you.
Sure, thank you, Season. I guess the question that's most present for me right now is just the labor of even thinking about these ghosts that haunt our histories. The labor of carrying it in the body, and I think it's often described as trauma, but it's also just like, I think that sometimes it's literally just exhaustion for me, and so that's something that I've been thinking about. That's a question that I'm bringing to it, of like how to how to find other ways to be with it, but also give oneself or one's body more space to rest, more space to be held, maybe by other imaginations or imaginaries. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what stories, what part of the stories are told and what part of the story isn't told. And in the case of, I was listening yesterday to this book by Washington Irving about Newstead Abbey, and Wildman studied all kinds of art. Like, he studied music and painting and poetry and writing. And Byron was relieved when Wildman bought the estate, because it was in this ruinous state. And he was relieved because Wildman had good taste. Wildman knew about all the art that would be in the house, and he would be somebody that could restore it to its former grandeur. And they were schoolmates. I don't remember which school, but some elite institution. And I just found that really interesting of like, oh wow, they're artists, but they're not talking about, the money that has supported him to have such good taste is from this plantation in Jamaica. And yeah, it seems like, that is still going on, even for me, in my family, but it's still going on everywhere. It's like what part comes forward and what part kind of goes behind or goes in the pocket or is too shameful to admit. And I think that that's been a big part of our practicing. So I'm curious about these things at Newstead.
I have I guess a kind of big question is what happens when you bring dance, ghosts, horror, and these histories together. Because I think I've been sort of saying, using ghosts and haunted houses as metaphors for these histories, and at the same time, I feel like there's also something that they also for me slightly jar and rub up against each other, because there's I think ghosts and horror are, I associate that with also with entertainment and escapism, and also a genre that's quite often quite conservative and like sort of cautionary tales. So what happens if you mix that with these histories that are very serious and difficult, and what happens if you do that also through dance, which again doesn't go somehow in some ways. So there's a there's a sort of logic to it, and there's also a part of it that doesn't make sense to me, and that's what interests me. And I'm also interested in specifically in relation to Newstead. I have a question around what kind of piece I am trying to make. Is it a site-specific piece, or am I going to be using my experience at Newstead to take that back into the studio, into a theatre or a gallery? So I feel like I don't know what kind of piece I'm trying to make. Those questions.
And it'll be great to see how that emerges organically out of the experience, and what these juxtapositions seem to be asking for. And it seems like in all of your responses here, there's a sense of I'm imagining, since Seke, you brought up the genre of the horror movie, the way that there tends to be this sense of disquiet that is lurking underneath the peaceful, the beautiful, and often the upper class, the stately, and the historical. And so when we have these certain kinds of aesthetic encounters, we can be also presented with this question of, okay, what's unsaid, and in what way does the unsaid make us somehow vulnerable? And then, of course, Mayfield, you were really pointing out like which bodies are vulnerable, and which bodies are kind of carrying this and quivering with this. Maybe all of ours do in various ways. So, really, really big questions here. I also wonder about how you feel about dance as a practice that is that has the possibility of bringing embodiment and liveness to contexts that can feel closed, historicized, over, and really relegated to the or not relegated, sorry, but now the property of those who are privileged to write our histories. So yeah, any thoughts there about the materiality and the embodied materiality of dance in these historicized contexts? And I think I propose among the four of us that that we do a kind of unmute yourself. I'll have a look at our little mute or unmute icons here. And if two people unmute at the same time, then I'll play teacher. If I can express a preference, though, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, Mayfield, about this, maybe first of all.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that for dancing in spaces like museums or spaces that are codified into this kind of historical preservation mode, I would say put more bodies in them, as many bodies as possible, and experiment more with that. I think that because there's this tendency for these historical spaces to have so much visual art and sculpture and static art in a way that so much of what's missing is the body, and yet so many bodies went into the building of this space, into the imagining of it, and so I think it's interesting that the body is often left out of museums and stately places, and actually even censored in a way, right? Like you can only stand in certain places, or there's all these rules of etiquette, of being in certain places. And so I'm in my work, and I think my work with Mary and our collaboration, we've explored putting our bodies in relation to monuments. This is one of the first investigations we did with How to Be Afraid, where we were in Liverpool and we would just like pretend to be these fallen monuments that were in motion, and we would catch each other. And I think that, like, in a way, these buildings are monuments, and so how can we use the architecture of the building to inform our practice and vice versa? Like how can these museums that are inviting us in, like, allow us to be nosy and disruptive and transgressive in ways that, so I'm curious about that, like pushing into the space a little bit more, how to do that. And I think that with the ghosts, there's an opportunity, to levitate or get into some of the crawl spaces or disrupt the archive a bit.
Yeah, just going off this etiquette idea, I think there's something about a space that every inch of it is telling you what not to do with your body. Don't touch this, don't go there. And I think there's a mirror in terms of like what societies, what the dominant systems are asking me not to feel in my body. In order for them to keep operating, I can't feel them, because if I really feel them, I can't tolerate them. And so for me, there's something there of like it's necessary to feel in my body. And so what will that invitation to feel that stately home in my body, and what it is asking me to do and not do, tell and not tell. Yeah, some friction to play with, I think.
Could I butt in before we
Please.
hear from Seke? But I'm curious, Mary, in your work as a somatic experiencing practitioner as well, the kind of psychic load of something like the horrors of slavery, and indeed, sort of where the legacies of that exist in our connective tissue and other elements of our physicality. Do you have kind of particular thoughts or something that you might want to offer us in terms of what sort of impact we want to make on that kind of visceral level on our audiences, and what might be too much of a psychic load for a useful reception of the content that we're wanting to deliver, right? We're wanting to open up histories. We're wanting to expand experiences and have something that's more true than what we're currently offered by our ruling class. So do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question, and something about tolerance and the space inside of me. When you hear people speaking about white fragility, it's literally about my own tolerance to be able to be uncomfortable. And in somatic experiencing, we don't talk about a catharsis, and I think it's tempting with a grief that is so great or a pain that is so deep to want to get rid of it all in one go and cry until all the tears are gone, or scream until there's no more sound. But actually, the way that we work is really slowly, really gently, and in tiny increments, because it's about expanding capacity. And so I think, Seke's project, like I had the pleasure to get a little taste of some of your choreographic work in your workshop. And the thing about horror is like it's also funny. It tips over, and we were playing with this too, Mayfield, that it can tip over quite quickly. So that's like a pressure valve, like the aim is not to horrify, it's horrifying enough. And so how do we metabolize something that's shameful, that's full of grief, that's full of horror? As a style, I think horror's got that pressure valve of it becoming the fakeness of it when it's apparent, or the relief, like being in suspense and then having the relief of that. But yeah, I think the invitation is like, how can we feel a little bit more together? And then when are there moments of rest or relief or happiness or ordinariness or something else that is in balance with what is already too much?
And as you were talking just then, I couldn't help but think of Brett Bailey's work, Exhibit B, and how it, to me, really missed the mark, because it was going for that, like, we're going to just in your face horror, and then you can leave, and you will have been, sort of washed clean by the catharsis of being able to like bear it. But has it actually changed you or healed you or begun any kind of a process? So I really like what you're saying, that this isn't a one-shot deal, a one and done matter of how much can you take, which also seems to me to be quite a sort of like heroic, masculinist, if not kind of straightforwardly white supremacist sort of way of doing things.
As you were speaking just now, I got such a jolt in my body of like adrenaline. I really feel like, whoa, the just even hearing your description. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll try and co-regulate with you with it all. I'm going to breathe deeply so that we all can. Sorry, everybody, please breathe deeply. Didn't mean to do that. Thank you. And Seke?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that what you're both saying also makes me think of the kind of power dynamic of performance and performance makers, and it's sort of, I think there's a potential to use a difficult subject to kind of gain power over an audience or over other people that I think is really tricky. So and almost sort of easy to slip into, I think, without even wanting to. It's not necessarily like kind of something that bad people do. It's like it's sort of just a possible outcome. So that yeah, I like what you're saying, Mary, about kind of expand. I think you're saying expanding the potential to sort of be with these things. So that I really like that. And I think in relation to the museum and the museum and performers, dancers, moving bodies. I guess, there are two things that interest me in relation to this project that are sort of similar but not the same thing. And one is about liveness, and I think there's one of the functions of museums can be to kind of put a kind of finality to a history. It's like that's something that's over, and it's sort of it kind of puts a box around a history, and I think in the UK there's in relation to slavery anyway, there's this sense of we abolished it, and that's the history, is that we stopped it, here particularly, I think, and I guess I mean the more that I read and research this subject, the more complex that is, and how history is gradual, and things have after effects, and they're actually in a way quite simple to see if we look for them, what those after effects are. But I think one of the functions of a lot of history and a lot of museums is to kind of say that happened then and now it's not happening. So I think something that performance and moving bodies can do is to sort of throw that into question through liveness. And then the other thing I think is slightly different, is in a way the opposite, is to do with ephemerality and movement, and how movement just disappears as soon as it's it's constantly not there. And there's also something, the flip side of it is that is also what history is. It's always going and falling away and morphing and being replaced. And that's something that I'm really interested in, particularly with dance and this subject.
But I hadn't really thought before about the power move of using difficult subjects to kind of gain power over an audience, and so I think we've got this very tricky and potentially very fruitful set of dynamics here, right? Where we have this history of, or rather, the history of the museum is in some ways a history of like objects and objectification, um, and the repository of objects and the objectified, through various kinds of various kinds of like assertions of power. And so I did think about the body in these spaces and the potential of re-experiencing a kind of objectification, and ways of resisting that. But it seems like Seke provided us with another pole to consider of the way that treating difficult subject matter with not the right calibration of sensitivity can create a different kind of dynamic or a different direction of the violence that can be inherent in liveness and in performance. Putting it out there, what do you think?
Yeah, I really, that was a great pivot, Seke, to think about. I think that within the context of this kind of modern or Western idea of what the artist is or what the artist does, there's so many problems, right? Like, you know, like you're supposed to be able to like just do whatever you want, right? And I think that it points to a kind of a notion of individualism that removes the responsibility that the artist might have to the collective or to oneself even, or to their ancestors or to other people's ancestors, whatever it is beyond the self, the modern person, being the modern artist on their own in their studio creating on other bodies or with themselves, so it's like I think that whole construct that we're dealing with as artists and then as performers in relation to this other set of art that is more, I don't know, visual art or art that is more encrusted in history in a way in a museum, that there becomes a kind of complexity in terms of how do we make work that's in a conversation and an embodied conversation, but also like many bodies as we connect to others, make this work that's like really provocative, how to navigate away from that training. I know, that my contemporary dance training is very much about being in the limelight. I mean, you want to be good, you want to move well or whatever. And so I think, yes, there's the danger maybe of coercion through making art that might have an agenda to move people or in a certain way. But I think that part of that is also how we've been positioned as artists. And I think that with improvisation, there is a potential to disrupt that kind of positionality and that construct of the individual artist. Because then, there's the ephemerality, but there's also like the kind of letting go of the self. So maybe, possibility, or this idea of the self. I think that that's the thing that I'm always struggling with and coming up against, is that like how can I be in conversation or be in relation to, versus in a kind of dynamic with, like me audience or me choreographer or me this, but how can I be in relation with? And so working with improvisation, I think helps me to kind of to shift into relation with. And I guess I wonder about the impossibility of that too. You know what I mean? Like I also feel like in a way there's I would like to put out there, to propose that like we are doing something that's impossible. You know what I mean? Like within the context of like being these kind of people that have these limitations of our own capitalistic society thrust upon us. How does one recalibrate or recreate something else that is not just about this kind of individualistic modality?
And the way that you framed improvisation here, Mayfield, seems to be a real kind of not antidote, but maybe foil to the way that Mary was describing the kind of the constant choreographing of directions in certain spaces, where you're kind of constantly being told how you can move and where you can move and when you can move to where. That there's a new sense of agency, or a new kind of a horizon of agency that opens up, which again seems like a potentially really fruitful juxtaposition that's made possible there, within, of course, sets of limitations. What dancers can do with their bodies seems both incredible and totally unlimited, but also it's sort of made to seem that way within these traditions of training that make certain things possible or not. Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody want to pick up on this idea of endeavoring to do something kind of impossible here? I feel like that's something that's worth like squeezing a little more juice out of.
I think, yeah, I'm always attracted to things that seem kind of impossible or preposterous, or or that feel like they might not work. That kind of always makes me feel like it's worth doing. And I think, yeah, I guess also like in relation to this subject matter and approaching it through dance, I think, it feels to me like it's that thing of where you it's like, I think that's how I feel about these histories, is like there's a kind of impossibility to it, and there's a sense of impossibility of being with it somehow. There's a kind of on many levels, and I feel like there's a sense of recoil. I feel like I'm often recoiling from, as I'm reading or watching or thinking about it. I'm like, oh no, that's too much. I don't want to look at that anymore. Yeah, I mean, that's in the kind of sort of background research, but then in the practice as well, it's like the same, of like, oh, that's kind of, I don't know if I want to go there. I don't know if I want to to do that, and I feel that as an improviser and as a choreographer, I feel that all the time. Like, oh God, I can't go to that place. So it feels like a kind of mixing these two things together feels kind of quite rich. And I think I guess, I mean, I've been sort of looking at some performance that other people have done around these histories, and I guess, yeah, I was trying to think about what I'm trying to do, and I think it's, you know, I was thinking, why am I making this, or why do I want to make this piece? And I guess part of me is like, well, how can I not do this? Like, how can these histories are just there? So if I'm not making a piece about it, I'm in some way kind of avoiding it anyway. I'm avoiding to look at that. That's how I feel. I mean, I could say that about lots of other subjects as well. It's not like this is sort of specifically has that property, but I sort of that's kind of my feeling about it.
Seke, that makes me think about the you know, the state of the stately house. There's a lot of stagnant areas, right? Like, and in anyone's house, like the things that don't get moved collect dust, you know, and it's like, oh, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that. Once I move it, then like other things start circulating. So it made me think again of this sort of cordoned off areas and sort of the instruction from the space saying, you know, move here, don't move there. Like psychically, I feel like, you know, that is what's happening with the questions I don't want to look at or don't want to deal with. And something you also said about the recoil, I think in terms of the impossibility, like the recoil, we talked about this a lot, the three of us in the improvisation, like the recoil is the imagination going like, what if, and predicting something that might happen or something that did happen. And its counterpart is like imagining in both directions, like what could have happened or what could happen, you know? And so I don't know what I'm saying here, if there's a rebound or something, but there's like something on the other side of the recoil that is the imaginative sort of in both directions of what else could be.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I keep thinking about the 800, you know, the number of like 800. I think the owner of the house had like over 800 slaves. And then, so the recoil for me would be, who were they? Who are they? What are their names? I mean, the recoil is the recoil, but then it's like, who are they? What are their names? Like, where was this plantation in Jamaica? Like, my great grandfather is Jamaican. Like, are they my ancestors? You know, so like, I think that, like, in response to both of you, like that's kind of what just came up. Oh, that's the next, maybe that's the thing, right? Like, that's the curiosity, that's the thing that brings us into another imagination that can be worth something more than the pushing away or something.
And I might just go ahead and badly paraphrase Freud because why not? But there's always a return of the repressed, right? And the things that kind of haunt me in my life, which is very much not like a horror film, it's guilt. You know, there's nothing that wakes me up in the middle of the night, or you know, sort of stops me cold, or you know, that does the horror movie thing, than guilt. But I want to bring in, so there are two questions up on deck at the moment, which I don't think that you'll necessarily be able to speak to, but I'm going to read the questions and then I'm going to frame them in a different kind of way. So there's a question here about the way that museums kind of get their histories and contexts across. So the questioner here is saying, thinking about many museums have pre-recorded tour guides that visitors use to guide them through a fixed, repeatable, and repeated narrative. Is Newstead Abbey open or interested in being changed by your residencies? Be that in tour guides or interpretation next to artifacts beyond your presence in the space. And so while you're not representatives of Newstead Abbey and your time embedded there hasn't begun yet, I think that this is a really important question about how institutions can engage meaningfully with these processes beyond using them as ways to improve their diversity optics and to kind of gesture. And so the next one that I want to wrap in, it comes from a questioner saying, Newstead is now very much part of Nottingham cultural identity, more welcoming to some than others, and not always the case in history, and a destination for local people and families. How/will the important ideas in your research meet the people who visit from this city and during your research or beyond it? If that is an ambition, what would you currently like them to take home with them? So, I mean, I would imagine that these kinds of questions will be very much on your mind as you as you take this on and as you start to think about what kinds of outcomes you want to generate. But what both of these questions come down to for me is the notion of being the haunting, being the poltergeist, being the presence that's disrupting the peace in a peaceful place. And so, so what does that feel like? What do you want to do with that? And Mayfield, I made a note of something that you said that I thought was that was about individualism, and I think both of these questions are about what's this about, kind of beyond the individual residency, the benefit for the individual institution, sort of maybe even the benefit to the development of your own artistic practices, all of which are good things, of course. So while you can't know the answer to these questions, if you want to consider them aloud, I'm all ears. Mary, you haven't started a round in a little while, so I'm going to invite you when you're ready to unmute and kick us off.
Well, I love this idea of an alternative audio guide. I think it kind of goes into what Mayfield was talking about with the individual. I had an issue coming up with students, around, it was a discussion around trigger warnings and sort of thinking about how, the responsibility is to warn the people that don't want to be there that they should leave. And this question of like, is that really how you want to deal with this? Is it to make sure that the ones, who are sensitive will leave? Is that how you want to make work? And yeah, I think it's something about that. It's like, who would you like to engage with this, and how would you engage in a different way? That's one thought of some kind of alternative audio guide. Um, the other thought that I had is related to the horror, and not only can horror be funny, but it's also can be fun to be scared. When Mayfield and I think it was day one of our first rehearsal period together, we just scared each other all day long. And it was hilarious. And it was very childish. And it was like that again, again, again. And that effect doesn't last forever. Like the next day, we didn't have that innocence anymore. But yeah, I'm curious sort of, how might people be included through playfulness, through the pleasure of being scared. And Mayfield, you mentioned also the legend of Sleepy Hollow. So when I was listening to this Washington Irving thing, that one of the ghosts, there's several ghosts that they talk about in the hall, but one of them is hearing these horses in the Great Hall and then not seeing any horses. And there's this account of hearing the horses several times. And then finally they got to the coffin of some of the friars. I think that Byron had the bones of the friars dug up, and he had these skulls and these coffins and bones from the friars. But clearly there's this like sort of double fear pleasure thing happening. And so I just wonder how it might be possible to not only be a disturbance, but ghosts get to have fun. They mess with you, So is it also fun for who's being scared a little bit? Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
I was just thinking, yeah, I guess maybe a counterpoint to some of the things that we've been saying about how museums operate is that often the general public or whoever is visiting the museum, often when you go to a museum, you have quite a lot of agency in terms of how you take in what you take in, and you can spend sort of the amount of time you want with something. That's up to you, and yeah, I think often you can go around a museum in a way that you want to. You can design your own pathway through it. So I think there's something about that engagement with performance that interests me. I don't know what I'm going to be doing exactly, and I don't know what you both are going to be doing either, but there's this possibility for audiences to be able to engage in very different ways to a kind of sit down proscenium show where it's like it starts at this time, ends at this time, you have to watch it from this angle, the lighting is showing you even where to watch on the stage, etc. And in a museum space there's a potential for the audience to maybe just sort of spend a few seconds with something or really get involved in something longer, and yeah, again, I don't know, but I'm kind of interested that in the possibility for me and my collaborators to speak to people who are walking around and have discussions with them. Yeah, if there's a kind of good way of doing that. And yeah, and yeah, to sort of I about fun, but I also I was thinking about beauty as well, the sort of beauty of dance, and the image of a ghost is kind of can be quite a beautiful image as well, and to kind of put that in. So yeah, yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I guess, yeah, sort of this image of horror as this kind of awful thing, but like you said, yeah, it can be fun, it can be beautiful,
and kind of ironically romantic
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
I wasn't planning on going anywhere with that ironically romantic comment. That was open and shut.
Well, I can riff off of that. I live next to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York, and there's a bust of Washington Irving, like right where I have to walk into the park, right? And you know, him and Byron were contemporaries, and so as soon as I noticed it, I think I sent a message to Mary and was like, "This is interesting." Like, you know, the kind of connection there, and you know, Irving was like the first American writer to be really well known in Europe, and so I think it's just interesting these tiny little I don't know that maybe the ways in which the ghosts are not relegated to the place, you know what I mean? Like the memory of the ghost, maybe the memory is a ghost of the relationships that sustained this era of romanticism in a way, you know, and also how Irving was very, I don't know, yeah, his work was very ghostly and kind of scary, and so the legend of Sleepy Hollow is like always scared me when I was a kid, and so just to actually make connections to, you know, different places, different landmarks, different monuments that might somehow, you know, have these ways of like exchange and like storytelling, and to if I'm able to make it to the residency due to COVID, I'm not sure, to exchange stories that might, you know, engage people about like how the actual place is also connected to other places through literature or through through, I mean, it could be, there's a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different lines of flight to how these stories, how they fly around and find their way. So I'm really having an image. I have never been there. I've never been to Newstead Abbey, you know, but I've seen the photos, and like, so this kind of idyllic place for families to come to and for people to spend time, that the questioner described, and that it's this local destination is I'm curious about it. I'm curious about how this destination, you know, can also be transported. How to, you know, how like just me going to Prospect Park and seeing this monument, like, in the connection there, I never would have known that there was a connection unless there was this collaboration happening. So the ways in which history can also teach us about each other in our own places where we live, and how that gets transferred is interesting to me too.
Yeah, I mean, when I was first checking out Newstead Abbey, the and I was looking into it for the first time with the knowledge that there's that there's a history of violent, murderous exploitation that is under the surface. Uh, and one of the first things I noticed about the use of the space is that it's available for weddings, which of course reminds me of plantation weddings in the US. And some of the most beautiful buildings in the United States um, are these plantation buildings, and of course these, sort of the vast grounds um, that would have been, sort of lush and fertile, and the reason why they were plantations. And I think that the the kind of a recent sort of nascent campaign to stop plantation weddings, or at least to make it more known that this is in quite poor taste, um, leads some people to feel, but sort of when we problematize, when we uncover these histories and make them a part of what we consciously choose to know about spaces, um, then then we experience a loss. Then we no longer have them, or their beauty is no longer pure. So what do you make of the threat that that sort of taking away the innocence of peaceful spaces can pose?
Yeah, I mean that sort of reminds me of the question around what's the sort of trace that we will leave in Newstead, and I think there's always a danger maybe with artworks that deal with issues like this, is that it's sort of a way of kind of dealing with something in a particular moment, and then, oh, we've done that now. We've been to watch the show about slavery, or I read the article about whatever. Now I can get on with my life, having done that duty. And I guess that can also work for institutions, like, oh yeah, we programmed, whatever it is, the black artist. Now we can relax and just whatever. So I think, there's that which relates to, I think, what you're saying, Susan, about not wanting I guess not wanting our world too disrupted by these things. And I kind of I think I feel like there's also a danger of kind of taking things too personally as well with these sort of subjects, where it's like, this kind of this sort of loss that you're speaking about, this kind of removal of something, is then like a kind of personal removal of, like, I'm taking away your fun, or your nice time, or whatever it is. And I guess that's like this individualism thing. It's like it's not anyone's. It's the world, and that this is reality. And in a way, it's sort of up to us. I don't know how to say this. Not to sort of fixate on things that are actually kind of the property of everybody, and not feel like a kind of this kind of thing of oh, you're disrupting my history, or my possibility to enjoy my life the way I want to. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like again a question of like being able to tolerate complexity, tolerate discomfort, but also tolerate complexity. Can a place be beautiful and have, a really difficult history? Can we feel both of those things at once, or is it not possible? And I think when you're talking about like taking it too personally, yeah, I think there's something of a temptation to want to, um, if the story can't be told because it's too shameful, then there's this pretending that's happening, you know. And if telling the story means like then the pretending can't has to disappear. Like why isn't there another option? And I feel like that's where the imagination comes back in again. Like what would reclaiming those spaces look like? If those buildings need to be destroyed, or does something else have to happen in them? And if something else has to happen in them, well, then what should happen there? I guess I just asked a really good question for whatever it is that we're going to be doing.
And I think, considering the rupture that allowed that building to be there in the first place, there's like a kind of extraordinary effort to build a palatial building. I mean, who did that? And like, and what was that land before that? And so, again, like just imagining that effort, and also like my, this body being within the grandeur of something that requires so much effort, and also feeling somewhat like humiliated by that. There's a kind of humiliation that comes with being so small in a place of grandeur, and feeling all of the resources and labor and money and that went into this, and that still goes into maintaining this place. For whom and for what and for how long? How can this keep going? How is it even possible? So these are questions that I always have, when, I don't know, just being in urban spaces even, like, how did this pavement get here? Like, what is this? What are we doing? Why am I wearing shoes every day? And so there's just something, and as a dancer, it's like, I live in New York City, so it's like every day there's questions about like, how do I traverse this space of this urban grandeur or decay, depending on where you are in the continuum, and to be in a place that is palatial, that is cared for, raises so many other questions about like the rupture, the continual rupturing that it takes to maintain such a thing. And then to enter it with the intention to like question that is like, can I do this? And how long can I do this? And can this be an ongoing kind of not interrogation, inquiry,
Yeah, I mean, I also feel like it's not just Newstead Abbey. It's like all stately homes, and it's not just stately homes. It's like a lot of private homes and other kinds of museums and banks and companies and the whole system. So it's not a question of like singling out particular people or institutions or families or countries, or it's like a kind of global haunting. I think it's like the whole thing is haunted by this history. It's not just like, even, saying transatlantic, yes, it went across the Atlantic, but it affected the whole world. And I think, yeah, and it's yeah, that's something I sort of feel like I don't want to kind of lose sight of in talking about a specific site. That it's not just like, oh, this is one place that where it all happened. It's sort of it's everywhere, and like, talking about the pavements and the railways, and it's like that's how they got there. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course there's this transatlantic slave triangle that's often at the center of the Anglophone discussion of this particular sort of modern atrocity. But then, of course, there's uh, the British conquest of India, and the really the practices of the whole of the British Empire, that really shouldn't escape scrutiny. And but I think one of the ways in which these institutions escape scrutiny, and I'm not talking about Newstead Abbey. I kind of mean, sort of the ruling class superstructure, is this argument of okay, well, if we taint this thing and call it bad, then we have to taint that thing and call it bad, and then we don't have any buildings, and then we don't have any pavement, and then no one can use their laptop or wear clothes, and everything's gone. And so okay, maybe, and exactly as Mary was saying, that we have to we have to increase our tolerance for complexity, and just saying, sort of, there are problematic elements of this thing doesn't mean, okay, so who's got the Molotov cocktails, necessarily. I think that there's a place for all kinds of cocktails. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. But I just thought of a way that I think about anti-racism work that I sometimes do with organizations, and that I think people are really afraid of losing their innocence, and losing the innocence of spaces that they rely on, because we live in a binary of innocence or guilt. And I think that if we move to, if not to a matrix, then to a binary of innocence or experience, where we look at things like adults and go, yes, I'm now 40, and so I can have ice cream whenever I want, and I usually don't. I get that I have freedom, and I also get that I have freedom to like make healthy choices sometimes, and not necessarily all the time. But it's like that. It's almost like we don't give ourselves enough credit that we can be grown-ups, and handle like actual real diversity. And we don't give ourselves enough credit for being an intelligent and innovative species that makes new things, and is constantly trying and making and building. So that was my sort of 10 to 8 TED talk. But I want to bring in a couple of quite interesting questions that we have here. One is on the nature of ghosts, first of all, and so I mean it's quite specific here, referring to what Mayfield said about the horses, and within the context of this future work, what's the nature of a ghost in these stories? And what's the nature of a ghost in relation to its previous carbon-based form? Like, can horses be ghosts without losing their identity to the collective concept of horse? So I think that this is definitely an example of a question with like no right or wrong answer. But like, in terms of where you are today in your thinking, how are you conceiving of this idea of ghosts within this notion of the haunting?
Well, the Headless Horseman is a ghost. And I think the horse is in the story is an actual ghost too, but it shows up like real, you know? Um, and so I think that there's a couple of different ways to work with haunting. There's a whole continuum, you know. I think there's fantasy, there's imaginary, there's um there's the haunted house, there's Halloween, there's so much, you know. Feel like it's like a buffet of like um ways to kind of into the idea of there's beloved, the you know the ghost and beloved, the unruly ghost. It just comes back to remind Sethe of like, see me, I'm here. And so I think that the horse, you know, I love this idea of the horse being able to be the horse and the ghost. And there's something else about there's so many things about horses in relation to this story, like but you know, in North America, the horse is has many meanings since the horse allowed for so many things to happen, you know. And this particular time frame of this story is in like, I guess it's like the time like just revolutionary times.
Yeah, I think that's right. Sort
Yeah.
of.
So
Uh,
there's a kind of specific time frame of the idea of the horse, you know, within the imaginary. And I love the idea of bringing this story into our work because for me, the story is local, you know. The Headless Horseman has always been in my imaginary as this like scary thing with this horse. But the horse was I mean, it's like the horse is defining the actual human ghost in the story in a way, right? Because the Headless Horseman is just whatever. I mean, he has a story, but the horse is the thing that is like the main defining character in the story of the actual body of the headless being. And so I love that as a way to look at how to create another kind of imaginary, you know. Maybe the Headless Horseman gets me to Newstead Abbey. I don't know. Maybe that's how I get there. And so what kind of fantasies are we weaving for you know, to make these journeys into the haunting, into the haunted space?
Mayfield, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the sound of horses being a particular time, like your sense of like either trouble is coming, like you can literally hear trouble coming, or escape or urgency, like I gotta get there or I'm getting away, and that having that sound. And I was trying to think like what's our equivalent of that. I don't know if we have that. I guess the only thing that came to mind was like the action film sort of car chase sequence, maybe, you know, is like maybe a version of that. But yeah, there's something about if my nervous system is wired to like hearing trouble coming or getting away from trouble, then I feel like the haunting also can be, like you said, so many layers. It can be my guilty conscience. It can be, you know, the thinning of the, you know, the veil between the realms. It can be, you know, but it's definitely like a way of arriving or departing. Mm, mm.
I'm really interested in these ghosts that are where there's a question mark around them, like where it's like, is there a ghost or isn't there a ghost? Or where only some people can see the ghost? Or where you think there's a ghost and it turns out it is a ghost, but it's not the ghost that you thought was the ghost. This kind of this or wondering, I don't know, like thinking about Beloved, the Toni Morrison book, where it's like there's a sense that, for me anyway, when I was reading it, there's a question around, so in this world, are there ghosts? In the kind of world that the book is describing, are there ghosts that people just kind of accept that there are ghosts, or not, or is there something else going on here? So I like these these questions, kind of question mark ghosts, the other example is where you discover that you're the ghost, or or like, oh, everybody's dead, or whatever it is, whatever the kind of I'm interested in these kind of this potential of the ghost to be a question.
Well, the thing that I was actually not going to bring this up. I was going to email Mayfield after this privately, but because the Headless Horseman keeps coming back, and so briefly, an elder of the Wolf clan of the Seneca Nation in upstate New York told me about the area around the sort of Adirondack Mountains and like the Catskill River and that area north of New York City, and said that the Seneca didn't live there. Sort of there were parts of what became the Dutch settlement where the Seneca did not live because of the energy coming from the land there, that geologists have since found is one of the like last places where the primordial oceans receded, and so it had this energy that was just not telling them this is a place to like live, and so they didn't. But then when the Dutch came and colonized, they lived there, and they ended up having these experiences like visitations by the Headless Horseman, Rip Van Winkle, who slept for 100 years, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, all of these ghostly disturbances that are, just like you say, Mayfield, like about a type of relation. So these weren't aggressive forces to the Seneca, who just kind of got that, sort of, okay, this is your dance space, this is my dance space. But instead, if you want to just go and say, like, no, I will be wherever I want, then there's not necessarily going to be a lot of like restful nights. But I brought that little anecdote in because I think it's funny, and but also to wrap in the next question of the notion of kind of all stately homes and all colonized nations. The concept of Canada, the concept of North America, in relation to the ongoing violence, the ongoing violent colonization of indigenous people. I think also there the ideas that were brought up in that remind me of what Mary was saying about what even was Newstead Abbey before that, because there is this complicated history of Newstead being first a medieval location, and we often don't remember that there was a displacement and a kind of coloniality that wiped out a lot of English indigenous religions and folk practices for the sake of sort of Christianity and the Holy Roman Empire and kind of being part of Christendom. That's sort of it just shows that this is structural, and these things come in waves, and actually the taking it personally that Seke was saying really kind of like sticks us in place, and can make things more specific than they need to be at times, rather than the more sort of open idea that that this structure of relations and the structure of the difference between who labors and who profits are really what we're questioning here, um, instead of, or even at the same time as, pointing fingers, naming names, facing facts, sort of thing. So yes, so I guess what kinds of complexities are you interested in, and what kind of simplicities are you interested in? Big question, but off the top of your head.
Whenever I look at photos of Newstead Abbey, I just want to lay on the grass there. I'm like, oh, this looks like a nice place to lay down and take a nap in the sunshine. And in terms of like the kind of most simplistic urge, when I see like a large lawn, like lawns are so, in a way, strange, but they invite you to occupy them in a way. In terms of the complexity, I'm so curious about like the maze-like quality of the gardens, and just like the structure of the building itself, and learning more about like how does that, how might that affect a body in space moving, just like literally the geometry of it all. And then what kind of recall might that have in relation to so many of, Mary and I, we've been working together for, 5 years now. And so our work is really ongoing, and to kind of have the cushion of all of that time and space that we have shared, as a complex like place to dip in and out of, is something that I'm curious about how it will develop in this conversation with this place, with this museum.
Something that I decided was to I'm working with 5 black dancers, and I had so many different ideas for what. At first I was thinking of working with actors, and then I was going to make a solo, and then I decided to make a group piece, and I did a workshop at Wainsgate Dances in Hebden Bridge, which Mary came to, and actually all the participants were white who came to that workshop on this theme. And so I was thinking about that could be interesting. But I have in the end gone for only working with 5 black dancers, which feels kind of simple and complex, and kind of I'm imagining, particularly in the context of Newstead Abbey, what that will mean to see a group of black people dealing with this subject. I feel like there's something kind of obvious about it, but also tricky on lots of levels, and I guess also I think that that there's the simplicity of I feel like people, I think there's a kind of idea, not a kind of thought out idea, but I think there's a kind of assumption sometimes in the UK. If you see a black person, it's like, oh, they're descended from enslaved peoples, which is not the case of all the people that I'm working with. Some are, some aren't. I'm not. In fact, some of my white ancestors were slave owners. So there's a kind of there's a kind of complexity around representation and performance and race that I sort of there's something that I want to kind of disrupt there, but I feel like I need to disrupt it by going through simplicity rather than coming at it the other way. Yeah.
Enjoying Seke's answer, and then I realized my turn. So I don't know. I guess where my head went was to this COVID situation and the complexity of like actual bodies actually together in space. So Mayfield and I now have done two online projects. And some things are less complex than they seem they will be. Like sometimes, like when we talked before about the impossible, like it's extraordinary what's possible. Like when it seemed like everything collapsed, and then still we keep building new ways of being together and doing stuff. I'm curious about what it feels like to be in this place. Now that I've like whet my appetite reading about it, like I want to know, what does it feel like to walk around and just be there? In complexity, like one thing that really interested me yesterday was the chapter from this. So I listened to the whole audiobook yesterday, so it's fresh in my head. Oh no. Okay, my earplugs might die. Let's hope not. But there was one chapter about Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest, which we didn't even talk about Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. But when Irving was talking about Sherwood Forest, I was like, oh my God, he's talking about everything. He's talking about deforestation and the sort of monoculture. Like in what year was that? Like, I don't know what year it was, but I couldn't believe that he was talking about the same things that we're talking about now in relation to taking down that forest and in service of capital, And yeah, that just kind of twisted things again. It was like, wow, all the signs they all point to the same places. Like, So there's a kind of frustration, but also like a pleasure to it also. In terms of what you both are saying about don't take it personally. It's not this place and that person. It's the whole thing. And that can be horrifying, but it also can be more simple. It's like, yeah, if we're trying to figure out what we can say and can't say, like that's too small. That's too small. So yeah, that's my answer for now. I don't know what else will come up in the simple and complex.
I wanted to say, Mary, that we, our project, How to Be Afraid, has a question mark at the end of it. How to be afraid? So there's an interesting also almost like it's almost like a palimpsest with the question mark, right? Because it's repeating itself backwards. And it's a very simple, question, not be afraid. But at the same time, I also see it as asking how to be alive. How to be alive? Because being afraid is being alive. Like, there's a way in which fear keeps us alive. Like, survival involves fear. And so I think that that's something, these kind of simple, offering these simple questions that can kind of be worked around and with, has something to do with working with complexity and simplicity at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I really quite like this next question that's come through the Q&A box. One of the fundamental missions of museums is to conserve, despite any apocalypse. How do you think the idea of conserving these actions and creative reflections of new and powerful imaginary that you provoke? How do you think about temporality in terms also of accelerating some matters of reparation of some people's imaginary? And so, yeah, we have this idea of the conservative, right? I mean, in its kind of pure sense of needing to keep things safe and needing to make sure that some things last. And then there can also be conservative kind of versus progression and progress and change, which I think also brings in this notion of temporality, the acceleration of reparations. Although I'm not sure there's even a lot there to accelerate. We might have to start it and then accelerate it. But yeah, what do you make of this notion of the fundamental mission of museums as a kind of conservative function?
I mean, I think there was a comment here. The first question from Sue McLean was that Sue? I'm not going to be able to find it.
It's okay. That was I've got it here. So it was the first question about the kind of pre-recorded tour guides that are fixed, repeatable, and repeated.
Exactly.
And is the Abbey interested in changing these narratives?
Exactly. Yeah. So the conservation is an interesting one in if we're thinking about this kind of practiced, repeated narrative. We keep telling the story this way, and that makes sure that it gets passed down this way. And so, a disruption is one thing, and telling the story differently is another thing that isn't necessarily at odds with conservation, but conservation, does it have an implication of keeping it the same somehow, right? And does it have to be about keeping it the same? Is there a way to care for something that is not about not allowing change?
Yeah, I think that conservation of particular archives have historically, been guarded by certain institutions like the church or, wealthy patrons or, for the continuance of their legacy or somebody else's legacy. And I think that there are other archives that need to be preserved, but that, you know, the nature of the archive shifts, you know, in like for example, the, you know, Sadia Hartman writes about this idea of like the archive that can never be found, you know, and her Venus in Two Acts, yeah, where she tries to find the archive of these girls on the slave ship, but she just can't find it. And so what do you do with that? What do you do with the archive of Newstead Abbey that you can't find, but maybe there's a trace of it in some kind of legal document? You know, it's like, who values what archives, and why do certain artifacts or art objects get conserved, and what archives get conserved as art? And then and so I think that this is definitely something that needs to be discussed more, especially in relation to bodies, because bodies have been artifacts and have been Black bodies have been archived as Black body parts. So yeah, I think it's complicated. I think it's in the context of temporality, there may be some breadth there, some spaciousness to reimagine archives, or to imagine, you know, rearranging timelines. So I think those are possibilities. Those are always possibilities, you know, the speculative archive.
Yeah, go for it, Mary.
I just remembered the word I was trying to think of, so it's just a little blip. It's not another round, but like stewardship is what I was trying to think of. So, you know, when we're talking about land, like conservation again has this implication that, you know, this piece won't be touched. And I just think there's something impractical and sort of difficult about that. And stewardship, like for me, implies more movement, that change is possible, that movement is possible, that, you know, something can be introduced or moved, or yeah. So then I was trying to think about that in relation with the house.
Yeah, I exactly. I was thinking about this kind of continuum between exclusion and inclusion, and like you know, you could look at a museum as something that first includes some artifacts, some histories, and then it also excludes other histories, artifacts, and I guess I'm interested in this potential of kind of constant inclusion. It's like, oh, and it can also be this kind of space, and we could also talk about this history, and we could also do, you know, we could also turn it upside down, and but not in a kind of without an emphasis on then kind of putting a kind of full stop after any of these things. That it's like we're kind of, I think this is like following on from what you're saying about stewardship. It's like constantly open to things, to new information, to new possibilities, new ways of looking at things, and yeah, I mean, I think, I think museums do that anyway, but yeah, I guess kind of thinking about kind of just putting the emphasis on that, I feel like that's kind of, I imagine that's what our projects will be part of, that kind of movement.
There are some really excellent and thoughtful questions here in the Q&A, but I think that we just have time for one more before we wrap up. But I want to just for our archive, for the recording and the continuity of this event and its afterlife. I'd like to just kind of give a couple of moments to the questions that are going to be not the very last question that I put to the panel, and then I'll put the last question to the panel. Then Eleanor will come back and give us some closing remarks. So I do quite love this very considered question: how do we let the walls speak? How can we be connected to the ghost of history? Not really as memory or historical commemorate, because we will enter in a question of morality, and how we could be connected to other cultures or people who don't have a link to colonialism. And so, I mean, this is quite a complex question, but in the end, it circles back to the notion of phenomenology, and asks, how could we still be connected to the flesh of spirit, as Merleau-Ponty was describing in Invisibility, Visibility. So I hope the three of you memorized that, and you will be asking yourselves that as you go through your residencies. There's a question that asks, I read that Newstead was first founded by Henry II as penance for the murder of Thomas Becket. I wonder how/if the artists engaged with such gestures of trying to make good, do away with or transform histories of violence and guilt. Perhaps some places always remain cursed as useful placeholders for remembrance. I think that that's, sort of also really worth getting down with and asking. I think that's really, really good. And finally, this is sort of a comment, but again, super useful to consider. There's a thought for me about the difference between forensic archives that record provable, and there's a question mark in parentheses, provable fact, and archives that are composed to tell or forward a particular narrative. And I think that this questioner is bringing forward a really important distinction. And particularly even with the troubling of the notion of provability and fact, sort of placing that also in the field of still subjective or still subject to ideology and agendas. But the question that I want to put to you as the final question is this one. Do you individually believe in ghosts? And do you have an attachment to a particular time frame within 24 hours that you think of as being peak ghostliness? And so let's go in the same order as our first question, Mayfield, Mary, and Seke, and then we'll hear a final word from Eleanor.
I love this question. Please let me know if I get ghostly by the internet, because it's a little bit wonky over here. I actually had an experience of being, I had a friend who lived in Terrytown, where the story of the Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane, like that's the birthplace of that story. And I remember staying at her place, and there was one evening where I was there, and there were sliding doors in the house, like, you know, glass sliding doors. And there were like either curtains or blinds or something on the doors. And that night there was a thunderstorm. And I could have swore that I had a little visitation because I was totally freaked out. Like the hairs on my back were, you know, like everything was just so like, yeah, and it was lightning and thundering, and I felt like maybe, you know, I had a little moment with Ichabod. And so that is one story that I haven't ever really told anyone, but I remember having that experience. And in terms of the peak time of day, oh gosh, I feel like I am continually, I don't call them ghosts, but I am continually communing with the non-living. It's part of my artistic practice. I write letters to my ancestors. I talk to people who are close to me who have passed away. And I don't feel like I've ever seen a ghost, like, you know, like, but I definitely feel like I have felt the presence of ghosts. And it is very profound, and it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened a lot. Let's just put it that way in my life for me. But it has happened.
So I feel like I have more experience with the in-between than I do with full-fledged ghosts, which is to say that I have had experiences with family members who are dying where they seem to be in contact with something else while they were also in contact with me. And that's palpable. Like it came through language, and it's definitely like the words and the images that were spoken to me were coming from a different place, and I felt as though I was sitting in between. And connected with that, I think there's also like this uncanniness of timing, that like there is a little bit of control over certain things, like mind reading, telepathy, sort of waiting, getting lost. Like I got lost on my way back to visiting my family member, and I got lost in a place that like I shouldn't be getting lost in. It's the place I grew up in, and I've been driving back and forth from my home to the hospital every day. And I got lost like right before they died. And they still waited for me to arrive before they died. And it's things like that that just make me think, okay, that was some kind of maze that's like in between here and there. And it's elastic and it's strange. But I can't say that I have experience with being haunted other than like my relationship with my own perception, maybe. Peak times of haunting, like any time really. I mean, it can be afternoon. Doesn't have to be nighttime, although it looks better. Yeah.
I think my peak time of haunting is weirdly early in the morning after I wake up. and especially if there's nobody else awake, then for me, there's this sort of space where there's a kind of openness to possibility that is not really there at any other time. It's kind of early in the morning. And in terms of, do I personally believe in ghosts? I kind of think like somehow as a performer, I feel like I'm kind of in touch with these other beings that are, I guess, like I think of them as on one level as imaginary, but I feel like my job is to, it's not about pretending they're real, it's about making them real. And there's something kind of, or being them even. And I mean, not that I'm an actor, but kind of being this thing. And that sort of feels like, I guess there's a feeling of belief in that for me. I feel like I have to believe in these beings. But yeah, it's not like it's people who have died necessarily, but they feel kind of, there's something of the ghost, for me in that. And I'm also I'm also thinking about, from this other question of places that remain cursed. Thinking about that.
I think that's a really haunting and appropriate note to end on. So thanks so much for having me as part of this conversation, and I'll hand back over to Eleanor.
Well, yeah, thank you. I don't really have anything other to say than that. Thank you, Susan. That was a beautiful sort of crescendo to the question of do you believe? I really hope that Mayfield, you can come and lie in the grass of Newstead Abbey. And I hope that these residencies do go ahead. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mayfield. Thank you, Seke, for sharing so generously. And thank you, Susan, for holding the space. The video is going to be on the Dancing Museum's YouTube channel for a period of time, starting from now. If anyone wants to watch again or share it, it should just be on the Dancing Museum's channel. I think that's it. Thank you very much.